The the presentation it just comes to mind. There's a movie in which Tom Hanks does the character Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers had that song, "This Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood." The movie celebrates the life of this man, Mr. Rogers, someone I used to actually have on the television so that my children, grandchildren could watch, and talks about the many milestones, the many things that he did as an individual in order to bring about change in the world. And thankfully, as I look at the aspect of being at the focal point of that, at the zenith of that, at the moment where change was being done, we're now looking back on it, but you could see in the Mr. Rogers original shows that he did that change was taking place, such as when his neighbor comes over, the postman, and they're sitting and they're washing their feet. And you could call it foot washing, as done in communion services and things of that nature. When there were incidents in the community and places where that was just something that was uncommon. And to be ahead of the curve, in places like that, that is something that we're looking for, I'm looking for, and I hope you're looking for. Individuals who are ahead of the curve. They are not waiting until the society changes. They are looking really in the face of God, in the Spirit. They're looking ahead, and they're moving ahead, and they're changing ahead of the crowd. That's what this I Will Restore is about. I had a conversation with an individual on yesterday. It was at a Safeway store. I had never seen the individual, don't know the individual, but we were having a conversation, and my work, my original first book, one of my first books, was dealing with the aspect of physical sexual abuse occurring prior to the age of puberty or during the ages of puberty. And one of the points that I went through in regard to how to recover or heal from that process was the aspect of forgive everybody. Take 100% responsibility for your life. And you can do that in the past, in the present, whatever you want to do in regard to that. And then also blame no one, and then join or form a beloved community. So I had those as 4 points that were ahead of my 8 A's, as I call them, 8 A's. Those A's were awareness, acceptance, assurance, adoration, and then also association, assignment, accountability, and then also assimilation. So those were the 8 A's. And then it was almost like a 12-step process that a person will go through in order to facilitate healing in his or her own life, that whole piece in regard to that. It was a way by which an individual took agency. And what we do is teach individuals how to do that so that they don't feel a victim of whatever has happened to them in life. It gives them agency. And I've heard individuals who actually have gone back and they teach that in regard to really all points of life. When it comes to people of African descent in America, there is one individual who actually teaches that as far as people of African descent are concerned, in order to go forth in life, we must have agency. And agency has to do with the aspect, at no point in time can a person of African descent see themselves as a victim. At no point in time see themselves as a victim. They must look at this from the standpoint of seeing themselves as in some way having given themselves a problem, a challenge, not as an individual, but as a collective. And that challenge, that thought has to go through, that idea has to go through the mind and permeate all of history. And so we are working out this great challenge, this great problem which we gave ourselves so that we might have agency. as I was talking to the individual on yesterday, I used two particular texts, and they come to mind in regard to that even now as I prepare to talk about this aspect of prayer, meditation, and imagination, because we get to determine what the plot will be, how the story will be told. It's in our individual imagination. And there's that statement by this person named Neville that says, consciousness is the only reality, what we're conscious of in our mind. So if we get to write the story and live the story, we might as well make the story our own, no matter what the story has previously been. So here's the way that I looked at a particular verse of scripture. There's a scripture that says the conference of peace, the council of peace shall be between them two, or was between them two. And when I looked at that, in order to have agency, I thought of an individual who in spirit existed before the foundation of the world, was having a conversation with spirit, with God. The self with the self, you could say like that, the small self, the little egoic self, or with the larger self. And this was before the foundation of the world was laid. And the self gave to the self a challenge in regard and says, this is a challenge. This is a problem you've got to work out when you come to this earth. And as a result of that, that's what we have as life. And it could be one life. It could be a many lives. But at any rate, the idea is that you will go through until you have worked out every challenge that's in that life. The council of peace shall be between those two. And so that whole aspect. And if you want to get the idea of lives, then you have to go to the aspect of like the Bhagavad Gita and look at that particular way of looking at. That would be one place. You could also go to this aspect of in my Father's house there are many mansions, and consider the idea that the house, the mansions that are in there are different levels of time, and an individual gets to live whatever number of lives they want to live in regard to that whole piece. In my Father's house there are many mansions. So you can look at that any way you want. You get to play in the universe. You get to play in the universe. You get to play different characters. You get to play different ideas through whatever it may be. The council of peace can be or is between those two. And then the other verse is the one that says, I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And there again, it is the idea of the I. What is the I? Who is the I that's saying that? And when you put yourself in that place, when you put yourself, remember that from the standpoint that I'm talking about this is that there is an I that exists prior to being on this earth. And if you want to look at that again, you can look at the statement of God to Jeremiah in the book of Jeremiah, the first chapter, and verses 4 through 9, I believe it is. God said to Jeremiah, basically, there was an idea of you before you were formed in the womb. And God says to Jeremiah, the Spirit says to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I knew you. I knew you. Not some other you, but I knew you. So it's a particular way that God is speaking. I knew you. And so whatever that you is, there was a definite plan for your life. And so in some kind of way, no matter what your life has been, no matter what the traumas that you may consider, all of that, there's a you that's greater than anything that you have gone through. There's a you that without all of that stuff that has taken place, it has already been taken into consideration, and you have been declared to be greater than anything that has ever been done to you physically on this earth, because at my core, we're spirit. And so that's the way that we go about this aspect of understanding how to actually forgive everybody. Is that we recognize that all things are working together for our good. All things are working together for our individual and for our collective good. How else could we reconcile the goodness of God, the goodness of a father, the love of a father that would allow his child, or a mother that would allow her child to go through what we experience on this earth? How could we reconcile that? We talk about abuse on an individual basis. But there are some of us who have not had the abuse or had the disadvantages of people down through time and even today. When we think about it, when we actually think about what others have had to endure, we have not personally had those. We know about atrocities. We know about pain. But we have to enter into that pain vicariously so many times because of the privilege that we have. And so when I think about those things, I go through this process and I see a God who loves everyone equally and has a design and a definite plan for everyone. And he knows, or she knows, or it knows, whichever way, because God is not a man. The Bible says God is not human. God is not human in the sense that God is some type of anthropod. God is not that. Not some big human being. We think we make him so that we can in a more concrete way grasp the idea of God. But ultimately, God is spirit. The Bible says that those that worship God must worship God in spirit and in truth. And it's vital, in my estimation, that we get this understanding. And each statement that I make has to be worked out by the individual. And I encourage each person to work it out, to meditate on it. The biblical statement speaks of meditation as a full metacognitive process where you have the right and the left side of the brain. You are stepping into what I call liminal space, where you are sitting still, but there's a lot of activity that is going on. It is skeletal muscular activity that is going on. You're actually moving, though you're sitting still, you're vibrating. All of that is taking place. And it's just necessary to enter into all of it, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual aspects of it, the physical aspects of it. Because then you could go beyond time, beyond space, and work things out. Work things out. And be a watcher, as they call it. Be a watcher and see things that were unresolved before resolve. Because you, without the emotions of the situation, are not an actor in this situation, responding to a situation in the way that you would have done if you had the emotions, but you're an actor. You become one who is the one who is watching to see how to best arrange all the players in the play, if you will. You get to write it, you get to produce it, you get to act in it, you get to be everything, to stage the entire play of your life. You even get to move the events around, if you like, or to change them even perhaps. Time becomes something that can be altered. As Einstein said in his theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, well, you become the person that determines whether time is a constant construct or if it is relative. The tools that we're talking about are for mature individuals who are willing to discipline themselves in this whole experiment that is called living. Again, God said, before I formed you in the womb, I knew that you could handle this. There's a New Testament text that deals with the same idea. And I say to individuals that text is found in the book of Galatians chapter 4. And there's this indication that the element being dealt with is a child who owns the entire estate, everything. And however you want to think of that, you remember that in the original Genesis, in the book of Genesis, there is this statement that says God gave to the human dominion over the earth. God gave to the human dominion over the earth. Take that personally, that God has given you dominion. And then, if you like, again, there is this statement by the individual named Stephen Covey, where he talks about influence of the circle of influence and the circle of concern. And he speaks, there are many things that a person may have concern about, but cannot really influence. And then that smaller number of things that you can influence, bring about positive change, that begin with that. And the same thing is recommended here. Whatever you see as your dominion, whatever. There's a period of time in my life that I felt that I could do only one thing, and that was shave my face. And even after I shaved my face, I had a beard at the time, and people had comments about that. I found that to be amazing. And I had to state, I have the right to shave my face. I had the right to shave off my beard. And it was amazing to me. I thought it was my beard. And truthfully, I realized that even my appearance, individuals had comments. But ultimately, I had the right to consider and make decisions about my personal appearance. And as time moved on, that circle of influence grows, changes, and you gain more understanding, what we call self-awareness of oneself, one's beliefs, one's values, one's principles that one lives by, one's convictions, one's commitments, one's love, all of those things. And you discover that it's possible to love even if you are unloved by others. That's an amazing thing as well. All of this becomes possible to the individual. All of this is so wonderful. And so we have this item in the book of Galatians chapter 4. It says, I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no better than a slave, though he is the owner of all the estate. But he is under guardians and trustees until the date set by the father. So with us, when we were children, we were slaves to the elemental spirits of the universe. But when the time had fully come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem them who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And so when I look at that particular statement, there's that elemental spirits part. And I think that has to do with the laws of life, the laws of the earth, not just what is called the Ten Commandments or even the ceremonial laws, if you want to call them that, whatever set of laws they are. I think it has to do, because of history, with laws such as the laws of thermodynamics or gravity and all this type of thing. Because when man discovers how a law works, what is cause, and then he's able to transcend cause, and he can bring about a new effect. And that is why the metaphysicians say that consciousness is the only reality. And it was Einstein that said he discovered the theory of relativity, by which, by the process of using his imagination, as I understood it. I think I've read that somewhere previously as well, where he used his imagination and he imagined that he was riding a light beam. And this is what is being asked for here in regard to one's own individual life. To imagine a different life, a better life, yourself, for yourself. So this entire piece. And the vehicles by which transformation takes place, as we have mentioned here, is the vehicles of meditation, the vehicle of prayer, these vehicles that a person can use. Today, I was reading this particular book I've mentioned previously, Disciples of Spirit by Howard Thurman. And I've read this previously. I'm reading it again. And I just went back to his chapter here on prayer, and he mentions seeing Halley's Comet. He says, in the year of Halley's Comet, I was a little boy living in a small town in Florida. I had not seen the comet in the sky because my mother made me go to bed with the setting of the sun. It says some of my friends who were more privileged had tried to convey to me their impressions of the awe-inspiring spectacle. And I heard my stepfather say one day when he came home for lunch that a man had been down at the meal office selling what he called comet pills. And so he goes on and he tells a story, and he says that people thought that at one point that the comet was going to fall from the sky and that it was going to perhaps destroy a part of the earth. And so this man was selling these comet pills that if an individual took them, they would be protected. Well, he was concerned about that. He was concerned about that and somewhat afraid that that could happen, and he did not have a pill. And then there was the morning that his mother awakened him, and she asked if he would like to see the comet. And he got up and he got dressed and he went out into their backyard, and there he saw the comet, the heaven's awesome tail of the comet, and he stood transfixed. He says, with deep anxiety, I asked, without taking my eyes off of it, what will happen to us when that thing falls out of the sky? And this is the part I want you to get. There was a long silence during which I felt the gentle pressure of her hands on my shoulders. Then I looked into her face and saw what I had seen on another occasion when, without knocking, I had rushed into her room and found her in prayer. At last she said, nothing will happen to us. So get the scene. He begins in a conversation about the comet and individuals having the idea that things could fall apart, the world could be destroyed or their particular part. And in order to prevent that, some people had gotten different types of pills. Well, there are individuals today who get different types of things to prevent what they consider to be a tragic or catastrophic situation. And you might consider what you get. How do you prevent? How do you seek to prevent a catastrophe from happening in your life? What do you depend on? What do you believe will be your relief when it comes? And so he mentions these comet pills, and there are individuals who were selling these comet pills. And his mother, in order to help him to come to the point of understanding himself and God and spirit and all of these things, one morning awakens him when the comet is supposed to be coming. And as a result of that, they go out and he's able to look up in the sky and he sees the comet and he's awestruck by the tail of the comet as it moves through the heavens. And then he asks that question. So you're awestruck and all of that, you're caught up. And then this question comes, what happens if it doesn't go right? Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever got caught up in the vision, whether it's with God or whatever, reaching your highest ideal? And the next moment you say, what happens if it doesn't go right? What happens if I get to the top and I fall to the ground? What happens if? And his mother is there. And in that moment, when he looks at his mother, he thinks about what he sees. Now, he has seen the comet. That was awesome. But now, after asking the question, not taking his eyes off of the comet, he feels his mother's hand on his shoulders. And he turns in that moment of silence and looks into her face, and he sees something that he had only seen one time before when he had rushed into the room and found his mother praying. Now, what could be more glorious than the comet? What could be more glorious? I want you to contemplate and think about that. I don't know if you've ever had the joy of seeing an actual comet, Halley's Comet, in the sky. I have. I was blessed. As far as I know, it was Halley's Comet. The year was 1986, I believe. And I actually was able to go out in the middle of the morning in Michigan, Barron Springs, Michigan, to be exact, on the outskirts of Barron Springs. And I took my two young sons, Dennis and Bobby. And I took them out because we had heard that it was coming, and I took them out. And we looked up in the sky, and sure enough, the comet was passing over. We saw it. Glorious. It's just so fast, but we saw it. It was early in the morning, and we saw it. He is awestruck. Howard Thurman is awestruck. He's contemplating all of that, the height of that. He's contemplating all of that. Let me tell you one other thing. My youngest son, Bobby, actually has taken his children out in their backyard also. Recently, either 2019 or 2018, whenever it was. And they also saw the comet. So it's generational for us. Generational. They saw a comet. I don't remember exactly the name of it, but I know he wrote it, posted it on Facebook. They saw a comet. But the point is here that he's awestruck, and then as a child, it comes down and he thinks about this high point could become a very low point. And his mother's hand is on her son's shoulder. And he turns to look at his mother. And whatever he sees in his mother's face is more glorious than the comet. That's the point. And he's writing about this in prayer. And she says, nothing will happen to us, Howard. God will take care of us. He says, in that moment, something was touched and kindled in me. It was a quiet reassurance that has never quite deserted me. As I look back on it, what I sensed then was the fact, here's the fact, that what stirred in me was one with what created and controlled the comet. What created and controlled the comet was one with what was inside of me. That's how all things work together for good. For those who know that all things are working together for good for them. You can say it's like a mother's hand. It's like a father's hand. It's like looking and not seeing just the person that you see on an everyday basis, but there's something that is transformed. Your perspective is different in that moment. You see something that is difficult to just articulate. You just know, I saw it then and I see it now, and there's something inside that says it's the same thing. And when you try to explain it, all you can say is, I really don't have words for it, but I know it's the same thing. I know what it felt like. I know it's the same thing. It had the same feeling. It had the same identifiers. And he says, it's a quiet reassurance. He says, it was this inarticulate awareness that silenced my fear and stilled my panic. And then he goes on to say, here at once is a primary ground and basis of man's experience in prayer. And he said, I am calling it, for the purpose of this discussion, the givingness of God. Now get this. As expressed in the hunger of the heart, This is native to personality, and when it becomes part of man's consciousness focus, it is prayer at its best and highest. It is a movement of the heart of a person toward God. A movement, in a sense, is within God. God in the heart, sharing his life with God, the creator of all. Life. The hunger itself is God calling to God. Remember I said it is the self calling to the self. God is all there is. In him we live and move and have our being. And yet, the text says that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. It's all God. The self calling to the self. And so that's what he describes here. It's the same thing, stated differently. That this hunger, and when that hunger is fed, you have this sense of self-assurance. Well, how do you get to the point? Do you have to wait for the next comment? No, that's what meditation is about. That's what prayer is about. That's what the imagination is for. You can imagine that you're sensing and seeing and experiencing the comment. You can imagine that. That's what the disciplines of the Spirit is about. His entire book is about all of these things. And one sets themselves on this path because one discovers that it's worth it to take the trip. The destination is worth it. You may not discover its true value until, so to speak, the comet falls out of the sky. But you don't want to get to the point where the comet falls out of the sky and you're not prepared for it. There are all kinds of stories that are told about that. They say, pack your chute before you jump out of the plane. Pack your own chute, as a matter of fact, like parachute. Pack your chute. There are others that tell the story about, if you are on a ship, make sure the ship has everything it needs before the storm on the sea, because you don't get to go back to shore in order to get everything you need when the storm hits and you're in the middle of the ocean. You don't get to go back to the shore for that. You don't get to go back to the shore for that. And that's what we're talking about here in regard to this. It is so powerful. As I look through this writing, and I've underlined and highlighted and looked at so many things in regard to what he is saying here, it is just really a master as he just breaks down the thoughts and everything. He gets to the point where he mentions this aspect of adoration. Toward the end, he arrives at the point. I mentioned that I have 8 A's, and the last one is adoration. Actually, it's the middle one. It's the middle one. There's a point of adoration at the end as well. That I call assimilation, and then there's those that have covered a life. Something far more profound is at work. It is akin to adoration. It is the sheer joy of thanksgiving that God is God. And the soul is privileged and blessed with the overwhelming consciousness of this. It is a kind of thanksgiving that sings itself to the Lord because he is God. And this is the idea that is thought about here when it comes to prayer, that you recognize that there's communion with God and God is God. The self to the self. Yes, you've been blessed. Yes, I've been blessed, but God is God. Yes, to all of life, God is God. You just enjoy the fact, the recognition that in his words, that the mother was the mother. And she stood there to put her hands on his shoulders. Not only did she get him up in time so that he might see the comet, take him outside so that he might see the comet. And He saw the comet, and you would think that that would be enough, but the human experience is such that at the top elevation of the best outcome that you could imagine at that moment, there's something that says, what if? And at that moment, rather than letting you go down that road, Spirit just puts that hand on the shoulder, if you will. Says, I'm still here. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. I'm inside of you. I'm closer to you than breathing. Take a breath. I'm nearer to you than your hands and your feet. God is God. And the wise will say, in that moment, that is when I worshiped. That is when I adored God. Blessings.